I served at Oprah's private dinner, and the guests spoke in a language I've never heard before. At first, it seemed like just another exclusive event, until time itself started to bend. The more I tried to understand what was happening, the more I realized I was trapped in something far darker than I could have imagined. What I witnessed that night wasn't just strange, it was unnatural. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the chaos they were controlling. It came out of nowhere, the call. I never expected it. It was one of those things where you're sure someone's messing with you, right? I was just a regular server, not even on the radar for an event like this. But there I was, being asked to work at Oprah's private dinner. The first time I heard those words, I thought it was a prank. Who the hell gets called to serve at Oprah's house, especially someone like me? But the call came from her assistant. Her assistant. I almost hung up, thinking it was some scam. But no, it was real. They had a high-profile dinner planned, and for whatever reason, I was the one they wanted. I couldn't believe it. Oprah herself, the queen of daytime TV, the woman who's bigger than life. I was about to walk into her world, a world I only knew through magazines and television. It felt surreal, the kind of surreal that makes you second-guess everything you know about your own life. They gave me the details, the dress code, and the rules. Don't talk to the guests unless they speak to you. Serve the food and drinks. Keep your head down. Don't cause a scene. Easy enough, right? But something about the way they spoke to me, it was too perfect. They were almost too polite. It felt like I was being invited into some secret society, not a dinner. I arrived at the mansion that evening. If I'd expected something grand, that was an understatement. The house was massive, like something out of a dream. The lights were too bright, but the air was heavy. You know how sometimes a place feels off? Like there's something beneath the surface you're not supposed to know about. That's how I felt the second I stepped inside. The silence was too thick, the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl. It wasn't peaceful, it was unsettling. I wasn't allowed to walk around freely, of course. I was escorted to the kitchen, where the real business was happening. The chefs were all focused, moving in synchronized silence, their movements mechanical, too perfect. I couldn't shake the feeling that this place wasn't a home. It was a stage. Everyone here was playing a part, and I was just the background actor, trying to figure out the script. I was handed my uniform, then the orders for the evening. Serve the guests. Don't ask questions, and most importantly, stay out of the way. Simple enough, right? But as the first few guests started trickling in, I began to feel like I was the only one who didn't belong. These people, they weren't just famous. They were different. When Oprah walked in, everything changed. It wasn't just the way she moved or how everyone in the room seemed to watch her the moment she entered. It was the way she looked at me. There was something in her eyes, something I couldn't describe, like she knew everything about me without saying a word. It was like I was an open book, and she'd already read every page, but I couldn't process it. I had to focus on my job. I had to keep my head down. I was just there to serve. But as the dinner started, I couldn't ignore the strange feeling growing inside me. There was too much going on in that room. Whispers, subtle glances, and a rhythm that didn't make sense. I could hear the guests speaking in a low hum, almost like chanting, but I didn't dare listen too closely. I didn't know it yet, but I was already deeper in than I ever could have imagined. But that wasn't even the worst part. What came next, I wasn't prepared for. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to experience something that would bend the very fabric of time itself. I'd never been so aware of the air around me. It wasn't even something I could describe with words. It was like it had a weight to it, a pressure. You know how sometimes when you're in a room full of people, the energy shifts and it feels like everyone's thinking the same thing without speaking? This was that, except worse. It wasn't just a shift in energy. It felt like the room was alive, breathing in rhythm with the guests. I tried to shake off the strange feeling as the dinner started. The guests were all seated, talking in hushed voices, but I couldn't understand a word. Their language, it was like nothing I'd ever heard before. There was a rhythm to it, a cadence, like a song that had no melody. It wasn't just foreign, it was unnatural. It didn't sit right in my head. But I had a job to do. I was here to serve, not to ask questions or try to make sense of anything. Still, I couldn't help myself. Every now and then, I'd overhear a few words and they seemed oddly familiar, as if I'd heard them before, but couldn't quite place where. I'd catch phrases like, "It's time," and "the deal," spoken in that eerie tone, and my mind would reel. I should have focused on my work. But it wasn't just their language, it was the way they looked at each other, the way their eyes shifted when they spoke, like they were playing some sort of game I wasn't invited to. The atmosphere was thick, suffocating. My breathing felt too loud, like it was disrupting something bigger than me. And then, there it was, the first sign. It happened when I was serving the second course. I was walking toward a guest, a man in a sharp suit, his face cold and emotionless. And I noticed the clock on the wall. It wasn't the usual clock, the kind you see in every room. It was a massive, ornate thing that seemed out of place in the otherwise modern decor. But the thing that caught my attention was the second hand. It stopped. At first, I thought it was a glitch, a mistake. Maybe it was just a mechanical issue, a broken clock. But as I continued to walk toward the guest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The second hand hadn't just frozen, it was stuck, like it was refusing to move. I glanced around the room, trying to act natural, but no one else seemed to notice. The conversation kept flowing, the guests casually laughing, sipping wine, and chatting in their strange language, oblivious to the fact that time had just come to a complete halt. I took a step forward, and as I did, the second hand began moving again. Slowly. At first, it was a subtle shift. Then, it gained speed, like it was catching up on lost time. But it didn't feel right. It wasn't just the seconds passing normally again. It felt like they were rushing to make up for something. Something had been lost, and the clock was desperately trying to catch up. I stood there for a moment, frozen, not knowing whether I should call attention to it or just keep going with my task. But before I could react, the guest turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything's fine?" he asked, his voice oddly calm, too calm. I nodded, quickly shaking off the unease. But as I continued to serve, I couldn't stop thinking about the clock. And the more I thought about it, the more I started to feel like time itself had just shifted. The rest of the night passed in a blur of food and strange conversations. The guests weren't acting like anyone I'd ever seen before. They weren't simply enjoying their meal. They were savoring it, like each bite had a deeper meaning. Every action seemed deliberate, every glance calculated. And the way they spoke in that odd language, it wasn't just for communication. It was almost like it had power behind it, like it could control something. That night, I could feel the room itself was alive. It was like it was constantly shifting, bending just out of my reach. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, they didn't stay where they were supposed to. I could almost sense the pressure building, an invisible force pushing against me. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I had to refill a wine glass at the far end of the table. That's when I saw it again. The clock. But this time, it wasn't just stuck again. It was rewinding. I blinked, taking a step back, trying to wrap my head around it. The second hand was moving backward. Not a glitch, not a malfunction. It was as if the clock was erasing time, pulling it back into itself. I didn't know what I was seeing. I didn't know if I was losing my mind or if something far worse was at play. I should have said something. Should have told someone. But I didn't. The thought didn't even cross my mind. I was frozen, rooted to the spot. By the time I walked back to the kitchen to report the weirdness, I had no idea if I'd been gone for 2 minutes or 2 hours. The time was wrong, but everyone else acted like nothing had happened. That night, I finally realized I wasn't just serving dinner. I wasn't just a bystander. I was being watched. I was being pulled deeper into something I couldn't understand. Something that controlled more than time. But this wasn't the end of it. What I didn't realize was that I was already caught in their web, and they were starting to take control of something far worse than just time. It wasn't just the clock anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Every time I served a drink or moved through the room, the guests' strange language seemed to wrap itself around me like a cold, invisible hand. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the stress, the pressure of being in such an extravagant place made me hyper-aware of everything. But the longer I stayed, the clearer it became. They weren't speaking in any language I recognized. It wasn't French, Spanish, German, or anything remotely familiar. And it wasn't just foreign, it was something wrong. There was a rhythm to it, a cadence that pulled at the edges of my thoughts, gnawing at my mind. Each word felt deliberate, like they were speaking not just to communicate, but to change something, to twist reality in their favor. I'd catch myself trying to understand, trying to make sense of it, but the harder I focused, the more lost I became. I was standing by the kitchen door, serving a plate of food to one of the guests when I overheard part of their conversation. At first, it just seemed like regular chatter, but then I noticed the tone, the way they were speaking in perfect sync with each other. It was almost like they were synchronizing their words with the atmosphere itself. There was something methodical about it. The pauses in between. The way they let their sentences hang in the air. It felt like something was being built, piece by piece. Something much bigger than a dinner. I didn't dare get too close, but I couldn't help overhearing a few key phrases. The arrangement is set, one guest murmured. It's time for the final phase, another replied. The deal is nearly complete. At that moment, my heart skipped a beat. What deal? What arrangement? I didn't know it yet, but that was when I began to feel the pull. Whatever this gathering was, it was more than just a dinner. It was a ritual, a deal being brokered in the air itself, sealed with those strange, rhythmic words that made no sense but somehow felt like they did. I turned away, trying to focus on my job, trying to ignore the growing knot of fear in my stomach. But something inside me knew I was caught in something far beyond my control. It didn't take long for me to realize the full extent of the language's power. Every word the guests spoke, whether to each other or to me, seemed to shift something in the room. It was subtle at first. I would turn to fill a drink, and when I came back, the position of the guests had shifted. The way the food was arranged would change, but no one had touched anything. Conversations would restart, but they'd be in a different place, picking up from a moment that hadn't happened yet. The strangest part, every time I heard them speak, I felt myself lose a little bit of myself. It wasn't just confusion. It was like I was being pulled into their words, becoming a part of whatever they were constructing. It was like I wasn't just witnessing a conversation. I was being forced into it, into whatever it was they were building. That's when I saw it. I was standing at the back of the room, just observing, trying to make sense of it all, when one of the guests looked directly at me. She was a woman in a deep green dress with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach her lips. When she spoke, it wasn't to anyone in particular. It was as if she was speaking directly into my mind. "You're part of this now," she said, her voice smooth but cold. "You can't leave." It hit me like a punch to the gut. Leave. I hadn't even thought about leaving until that moment. I had felt the walls closing in around me, but I hadn't fully realized I couldn't escape. "Everything is happening now," she continued, her gaze never leaving mine. "You've been chosen." I wanted to speak, to demand what she meant, but I couldn't. The words were caught in my throat. Chosen for what? Then, as if on cue, the room fell completely silent. No one spoke, no one moved. The silence was suffocating, oppressive, but it wasn't the kind of silence you'd expect in a room full of people. It felt like something else was taking over, something that didn't belong. I could almost hear the language in the air, like invisible strings pulling at the fabric of time itself. And that's when the clock did it again. It wasn't just that the second hand froze. No, this time the clock wasn't just stopping, it was rewinding. I stood there, frozen, unable to look away. The second hand was moving backward, slowly at first, then faster, as if it was unwinding the evening, pulling everything back to a time when I didn't know what was happening. And I was still stuck in the middle of it. The room felt like it was folding in on itself, the walls bending and twisting. The guests, they didn't seem to notice. They just continued speaking in that strange language, their voices blending with the hum of the room. Each word felt heavier, like it was dragging time along with it. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly. My body was frozen in place, caught between the words they were speaking and the terror rising in my chest. And the worst part? The longer I stood there, the more I realized I wasn't just hearing them anymore. I was understanding them. Each word felt like a thread unraveling inside my mind, each sentence pulling me deeper into their reality. I was part of this, and I had no idea how or why. But this wasn't just the beginning. It wasn't just about being trapped in their world. Something far worse was coming, and it wasn't just time they were manipulating anymore. By now, I should have been used to the unease creeping up my spine, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. I was standing in the kitchen, trying to steady my shaking hands, when when one of the other servers walked in. She looked calm, too calm. Her eyes were distant, almost empty, like she wasn't seeing the room around her. It unsettled me more than I cared to admit. She didn't even acknowledge my presence as she walked past. I stared after her, but my mind wasn't on her. It was on the walls. The lights had dimmed, flickering as if they were trying to convey something I didn't want to know. I looked up at the clock. It was wrong again. It wasn't just the second hand like before. The entire clock face was warping, as if the numbers themselves were melting and rearranging. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was some trick of the light, but when I opened them again, it hadn't changed. It felt like the room around me was changing, stretching, like it was shifting between different moments in time. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Panic rose in my chest. I backed away from the clock, trying to clear my head. I was losing track of time, losing track of myself. The evening was dragging on. And yet, every minute felt like it was slipping away. I tried to remember when I first arrived, how long I'd been there, but I couldn't recall the exact sequence of events. It was like they had been erased, wiped away as though they'd never happened. I turned to leave the kitchen, but the door wouldn't open. I pulled at the handle, nothing. It felt locked, but I knew I hadn't seen anyone lock it. The silence outside the kitchen was deafening, heavier than it had been before. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I pulled harder on the door, frustration mounting. Then, a voice behind me made me freeze. "You shouldn't leave," it said. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. It was her, the woman in the green dress, the one who'd looked at me earlier, her eyes cold and calculating. She had that smile again, the one that made me feel like I was being studied, analyzed. Her eyes flicked toward the door. "It's not time yet," she added. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice. What could I say? I knew I wasn't the only one feeling the weight of the moment. She knew. She was watching me, and it felt like I was being controlled in ways I didn't understand. "Time's different here," she said, her voice low but laced with an almost seductive quality. "You felt it, haven't you?" I nodded slowly. I couldn't speak. The walls, the space itself, felt like it was distorting, bending, like it wasn't bound by the normal rules of physics. I could sense it now, an invisible pulse, a strange rhythm underneath everything. Like I was caught between two worlds, and neither one was truly real. She smiled again, but this time, there was a sharpness to it. Something that sent a chill down my spine. "You don't have much time left," she whispered, stepping closer. "But you'll learn soon enough." Before I could process her words, she turned and left, disappearing into the hallway like she was part of the shadows themselves. I stood there for a long moment, unsure of what to do. I couldn't leave the kitchen. I couldn't even bring myself to walk toward the dining room. There was something waiting for me in that room. Something that wasn't just dinner or conversation. The air was too heavy to breathe. It pressed against me, making it hard to think. And then, just like that, I heard something that sent a shock through my body. The distinct sound of footsteps coming closer. But it wasn't just footsteps. It was a rhythm. The sound was in sync, like a drum beat echoing in the hallway. I peeked out through the kitchen door. They were coming toward me, the guests. They were walking in unison, not speaking to each other, but to the air around them, murmuring in that foreign language. And this time, their words weren't just floating around the room, they were settling into the space itself, carving a path through the air that was impossible to ignore. Each word was like an invisible thread weaving the space together, pulling it tighter. I could feel it, as if the very air was solidifying, becoming something else. They passed by the kitchen, and I stayed out of sight, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from them. As they walked, the world around them shifted again. The walls seemed to stretch out, growing taller, like they were bending time itself. The entire mansion seemed to change, as if I were stepping through different eras. Each step they took felt like a ripple in time, moving backward and forward all at once. The strange thing was, the more they walked, the more I started to notice that the guests weren't moving at all. They were just there, standing still, but everything around them was shifting. The furniture, the lights, the entire atmosphere. It was warping. I could feel the ground beneath me shift, like I was standing on some kind of unstable surface. I couldn't understand it. How could they just stand there and change everything around them without lifting a finger? I took a step forward, my mind racing. I was losing control of everything. The mansion, the guests, the very air. I felt like I was being pulled deeper into their web with every passing second. Time itself wasn't moving forward. It was being pulled in every direction, tangled up in a loop I couldn't break. And then the light flickered. The world froze. Everything. I was standing there in the dark, the air thick with tension, unable to move. I had no idea what was happening. All I knew was that the guests weren't just playing with time. They were controlling it, and I was caught in the middle of it. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing I wasn't just a spectator. I was already trapped in their world, and it was too late to escape. I tried to move, but my body felt like it was weighed down by something unseen, something pressing against me. It wasn't just the atmosphere anymore. It was the guests. Their presence was suffocating, like they were too much to ignore. The way they stood there, always in sync, always speaking in that strange rhythm, it felt like they were reprogramming the air itself, bending it to their will. Every movement was deliberate, every word calculated. I knew I wasn't just in a normal room anymore. I wasn't just in a mansion. This was something different, something dangerous. I had to get out. I tried the door again. I pulled, shoved, twisted the handle with all the strength I had, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like I wasn't supposed to leave. It felt like I was stuck in some kind of trap, one I couldn't even begin to understand. But there was no time to focus on that. My eyes darted back to the guests, still standing in perfect harmony, their voices weaving that incomprehensible language through the air. I couldn't tell if they were speaking to each other anymore, or if they were speaking to me. The more I listened, the more it felt like they were pulling at my mind, prying at it, twisting it with every syllable. It was the language, I realized. It wasn't just words, it was control. They weren't just communicating, they were manipulating me, my thoughts, my senses. I could feel it now. It wasn't a mistake or a coincidence. The more they spoke, the more I felt myself slipping, losing pieces of myself. Like my thoughts weren't mine anymore. I couldn't breathe. The air was too thick. It wasn't just the weight of their words. It was the weight of everything. I needed to escape, but the more I focused on the door, the more it felt like I was locked in my own head. And then, as if answering some unspoken question, Oprah's voice cut through the haze. Do you feel it? She asked, her eyes locking onto mine. The chill in her gaze hit me like a punch to the gut. I nodded, too afraid to speak. I didn't need to say anything. She already knew. She knew what I was feeling, knew that I was beginning to understand what was happening. The guests were silent now. All eyes were on me, and I could feel the pressure building. I couldn't look away from Oprah. Her smile was faint, but it was there, predatory in the way she tilted her head like she was studying me. "It's too late," she said. "You've already joined us." Her words weren't just a statement. They sank into me, into my very bones. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine, as if something deep inside me was being torn apart. Join them? What did she mean? Before I could react, the room shifted again, this time violently. The floor beneath me buckled, and I staggered to catch my balance. Everything around me blurred. The guests, the furniture, the walls, they melted together, as if the mansion itself was folding in on itself. Time didn't exist in that moment. There were no seconds, no minutes, just this overwhelming sensation of being swallowed by the space, by the moment, by them. And then, without warning, the sound of the language filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't just an echo, it was everywhere. I could feel it in my chest, in my veins, in my mind. The words had weight. They weren't just shaping the room anymore. They were shaping me. It felt like my thoughts were being rewritten, each word sinking deeper into my consciousness, carving away at everything I knew. I tried to fight it, tried to close my eyes and block out the sound, but it was too strong. It was like the language was in my very blood, pulling me apart. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe as the pressure in my chest increased, and all I could do was listen. The words were everything, and they were beginning to change me. Through the haze, I saw Oprah's face again, just barely. Her expression was soft, calm even, but there was something deadly behind her eyes. Something that made me feel like I was on the verge of losing myself, of vanishing into whatever dark reality they were pulling me into. "You can't fight it," she said softly, almost pityingly. "It's already inside you. It's in your mind. You're part of it now." I wanted to scream, wanted to lash out, but I couldn't. My body didn't respond. My mind didn't respond. All I could do was stand there, caught between the words and the pressure and the suffocating presence of the guests. I couldn't escape. I knew I couldn't escape. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the room snapped back into place. The pressure vanished. The walls stopped bending. The guests resumed their conversation, still speaking that same incomprehensible language. They acted like nothing had happened, like the whole moment hadn't just swallowed me whole. But I wasn't the same. I could feel the words inside me now. I could feel their rhythm, their pulse, echoing in my thoughts. I had been changed. I wasn't just a server anymore. I wasn't just a bystander. I had been pulled in, chosen. I wasn't sure what they had done to me, but I knew I had crossed some point of no return. The guests weren't just playing games with time. They were playing with reality. And now, I was part of their game. And as I began to understand the full extent of what was happening, I realized something worse. I wasn't just caught in their reality. I was being shaped by it. And I had no idea how far they would go to control me. I don't know how long it had been since the moment I felt the change. Time had become something else entirely. Twisted, fractured. I had no way of measuring it. I didn't even know if I was still in the same reality anymore. But the strangest thing was the silence. It was thick, suffocating, like a fog in the air. The guests no longer spoke. Their language, the one that had bent my thoughts and twisted my perception, had stopped. But the silence wasn't reassuring. It was like the calm before a storm. I should have been panicking, but I wasn't. I was too far gone, too tangled up in the chaos of it all to feel anything but numb. I walked toward the door again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I was certain that I had to get out. The walls seemed to stretch further with each step I took. The hallway was longer than it should have been, but I couldn't seem to stop moving. Couldn't stop myself from heading straight for the exit. I reached the door and pulled the handle again. It opened, this time without resistance, but as I stepped outside, something shifted. The world outside wasn't the same. It didn't look the way I expected it to. The streets were empty. There was no sound, no traffic, no movement. It was the kind of silence that made my heart race. A strange, oppressive quiet that pressed in from every direction. It felt like I was walking through a dream that wasn't mine. I stopped. The air tasted wrong, like it was stale and hadn't moved in days. I looked around, searching for some kind of familiar landmark, but there was nothing. Just rows of houses, all identical, all perfectly still. I couldn't even hear the hum of the city. It was as though I had walked out of one world and into another. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe this was just the aftershock of what had happened inside that house. Maybe I was just so shaken that everything felt unreal. But when I looked down at my hands, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. They were trembling. I wasn't just shaken. I was changed. I turned around to head back, but the mansion wasn't where it had been. The street was different. The corner I had turned was gone. The house was nowhere to be seen. Panic surged through me. I'd left, but I hadn't gone anywhere. The mansion was still controlling the world around me. I was still trapped outside, but I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't find my bearings. The world had been warped. I rushed down the street, hoping to find something, anything that would help me snap out of the trance I was in. But no matter which direction I took, it was the same. Everything looked the same. The buildings were all mirrors of each other. The streets were laid out, exactly the same. It was like I was walking in circles, never getting anywhere. I couldn't tell if I was going forward or backward. My legs were moving, but it felt like I wasn't really walking, like I was just being carried. The more I struggled, the more the world around me seemed to slip further out of my control. Then, in the distance, I saw a figure. At first, I thought it was just another hallucination, another twisted reflection of my mind. But as the figure drew closer, I realized it was someone I knew. It was Oprah. She walked slowly, deliberately, her eyes locked onto mine. She didn't speak, but there was a message in her gaze, a knowing, calculating stare that made my blood run cold. "Did you think you could leave?" she asked, her voice smooth but cold. It wasn't even a question, it was a statement that sent a chill through me because I realized I'd never left. Not really. "No," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. My throat was dry. My body felt like it was no longer mine. "I can't." She smiled, that same sharp smile that I had come to dread. But there was something else in it now. Satisfaction. She was pleased. like she had been waiting for this moment, and she had known it was coming. "You can't escape," she repeated, almost as if she were explaining something to a child. "This is where you belong now. This is your reality." Her words hit me like a tidal wave, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight. I had tried so hard to escape, but it was like the walls of the mansion had followed me, like they were the ones controlling everything, even outside. The streets, the air, the silence. It was all wrong, but it was all theirs. "You're not going anywhere," she said again, her tone now almost affectionate. "You're part of this world now, part of our world." And just like that, everything clicked into place. I wasn't outside at all. I hadn't escaped. The mansion, the world inside it, it had followed me. It had rewritten reality, and I was now a part of it. There was no out. There was no escape. I was trapped in the mansion's reality, a reality where time bent, where minds were controlled, where nothing was what it seemed. I was part of their game, and there was no way out. Oprah smiled again, her eyes gleaming with something darker now. "You've already crossed the line," she said. "You've already given yourself to us. Welcome to the real world." And that was when I realized the worst part. I wasn't just part of their world. I was already being shaped by it. The more I tried to fight back, the more they controlled me, and there was no escaping that terrifying truth. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. I was standing in the middle of an empty street, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something. It felt like the air itself was pressing in on me, pushing, pulling, as if I were suffocating inside the illusion they had created. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but I couldn't. The reality I had once known was gone. The streets outside the mansion, the homes, the quiet, they weren't real. They were just another piece of their twisted world, a world I had been pulled into, step by step. I turned back toward Oprah, the one person who seemed to hold the key to it all. But even she wasn't the same. She wasn't just a figure anymore. She was the architect of this nightmare. Her presence warped the air, the space, everything around me, and her smile, that smile made my blood run cold. "You're part of this now," she said again, her voice like velvet, smooth but icy. I shook my head, not understanding. No, I can't be. This wasn't happening. I couldn't be part of their world. But deep down, I knew I was. The moment I stepped into that mansion, I had lost myself. The moment I served at that dinner, I had become theirs. I thought about everything that had happened, the strange language, the bending of time, the way they had manipulated me without me even realizing it. I thought about the clock, the way it had stopped, then rewound, as if I were caught in an endless loop. The way they had spoken, not just with words, but with power, a power that pulled at my very being. And now, I could feel it. I could feel it in my chest, in my mind. The words, the language, it was in me now. Every beat of my heart was aligned with their rhythm. Every breath I took seemed to echo the cadence they had set. It wasn't just their influence, it was my own. I was woven into their fabric. Oprah's face softened as she stepped closer. She looked at me like she was waiting for me to understand. Like I was finally seeing the truth. "This isn't just about power," she said, almost gently. "This is about control. And now, you're part of it. You'll always be part of it." I tried to turn away, to look at anything but her, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like the mansion's walls were closing in on me again, surrounding me, trapping me in this endless, suffocating cycle. Time had no meaning anymore. The outside world, it was just another layer of their design, a place where I could never escape. I felt the weight of her words sinking in. Control. They had never wanted me to escape. They had wanted me to join. I had been part of their plans all along, whether I knew it or not. My presence at the dinner wasn't an accident. It was intentional. I had been chosen, not just to serve, but to be absorbed into their world, to become one of them. "You're not leaving," Oprah said, stepping even closer. Her voice was a whisper now, but it felt like a command, like it was reaching into my very soul. "This is your reality now." And in that moment, I realized something more terrifying than anything that had happened before. There was no escape. I wasn't in some nightmare I could wake up from. I wasn't trapped in a house or a mansion. I was trapped in their world. The mansion was just a symbol, a window into a much larger prison. The truth was, I had never really left, because now, as I stood there consumed by their control, I understood the most horrifying truth of all. I was already a part of their game, and no matter how hard I tried, I would never be free. The world around me had shifted once again. Everything, the streets, the sky, even the air, felt wrong. But it wasn't just the outside world that was distorted. It was me. I could feel the language they had spoken crawling through my veins, bending my thoughts, altering who I was. I had tried so hard to fight it, to break free. But now, I knew. I was already a part of this twisted reality. Oprah was right. There was no leaving. I wasn't just a servant or an observer. I was entangled in their world, shaped by their words, controlled by their rhythm. And this was my reality now. No more running, no more escape. They owned me, just like they owned time itself. And the worst part? I didn't even know if I ever existed outside of this nightmare, because in their world, I was just another piece in their game. And I had no choice but to play.